Reverend Charles Davis will now do our sermon.
As an undergraduate majoring in psychology, I was most impressed with humanistic psychology. Psychoanalysis seemed too mythical, always battling the dragons of the unconscious, and behavioralists seemed too mechanical. I believe that humans were more than organisms responding to the environment. And of course, whenever I think that I have an original thought, I'm always pleased to be corrected by someone writing in the 19th century. But as Channing did when he talked about the free mind. And that line that says, I call that mind free, which is not passively framed by outward circumstances. Take that, B.F. Skinner. And is not a creature of accidental impulse. Take that, Sigmund Freud. So the relationship between Unitarianism and Universalism and the humanist psychology was there even before the invention of humanist psychology. I like the ideas of Carl Rogers, who thought if people were given unconditional positive regard, they would find the goodness within themselves. Or in the terms of Abraham Maslow, they would become self-actualized. These ideas may have led for me to become a Unitarian Universalist. I thought there might be some congruence between my favorite forms of psychology and favorite forms of religion. So I'm researching this sermon. And I go to the website for the Association of Humanist Psychology, which opens with these words. Throughout history, many individuals and groups have affirmed the inherent value and dignity of human beings. That sounds kind of familiar. And the website continues, they have spoken out against ideologies, beliefs, and practice which held people to be merely means for accomplishing economic and political ends. They have reminded their contemporaries that the purposes of institutions is to serve the advanced freedom and power of their members. Humanistic psychology is a contemporary manifestation of that ongoing commitment. Yes, humanist psychology is a lot like Unitarian Universalism. It emphasizes human freedom. It's not full of shoulds and should nots. It is the psychology and religion of finding oneself. Or put technically, self-actualization. Maslow believed that self-actualization was the highest of human beings. That after humans has fulfilled their physiological needs and their needs for safety and moved on to their need for love and belonging, and then their need for esteem and recognition, to feel good about themselves. When they had all that done, they came to a point where they were ready to be self-actualized. And he described them as people who had acceptance and had realistic perceptions of themselves and the world around them. They were problem-centering. They were concerned with solving problems outside of themselves, helping others, and finding solutions to the external world. There was a spontaneity. The self-actualized people were spontaneous in their internal thoughts and outward behavior. While they can conform to rules and social expectations, they also tend to be open and unconventional. Another characteristic of self-actualized people is the need for independence and privacy. While they enjoy the companies of others, these individuals need time to focus on developing their individual potential. And a continued freshness of appreciation, wonder and awe, even simple experiences continue to be the source of inspiration and pleasure. And also he talked about peak experiences. Individuals who are self-actualized often have moments of intense joy, wonder, awe, and ecstasy. And after these experiences, they feel inspired, strengthened, renewed, or transformed. Carl Rogers speaks of the self-actualized person as being a fully functioning person. He writes, "It appears that the person who is psychologically free moves in the direction of becoming a more fully functioning person, more able to live fully in and with each of all of his feelings and reactions, makes increasing use of all organic equipment to sense as accurately as possible the existential situation within or without, able to experience all the feelings, less afraid of any of his feelings, and is often his own sifter of evidence, and more open to evidence from all sources, completely engaged in a process of being and becoming himself, and thus discovers he is soundly and realistically social, lives more completely in this moment, but learns that this is the soundest living for all time, a more fully functioning organism. And because of the awareness of himself, he is becoming more fully functioning." These moments where you just get it, and you can be truly yourself and truly related to others. These moments remind me of experience expressed by the 19th century transcendentalists. Emerson wrote about peak experiences. He said, "Let us learn the revelation of all nature and thought that the highest dwells within us, that the sources of nature are in our own minds, and there is no screen between our heads and the infinite heavens. So there is no bar or wall where we, the effect, cease, and God, the cause, begins." Margaret Fuller describes responding spontaneously and unconventionally to the soul. "Let us be wise and not impede the soul. Let her work as she will. Let us have one creative energy, one incessant revelation. Let it take what form it will, and let us not bind it by the past to man or woman, black or white." She wrote that in a treatise called Woman in the 19th Century in 1845. And Thoreau, coming back from Walden, wrote, "I learned this, at least by my experience, that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live a life which he has imagined, he will meet with success unexpected in common hours. He will put some things behind and will pass an invisible boundary. New universal and more liberal laws will begin to establish themselves around and within him." Walt Whitman pushed this point, this concept of the fully functioning human, to the point of divinity, writing, "Each of us is inevitable. Each of us is limitless. Each of us with his or her right upon the earth. Each of us allowed the eternal purpose of the earth. Each of us here as divinely as any is here." So, if fully functioning self-actualization is the goal, how do we get there? Rogers believed in something called client-centered therapy or person-centered. And he described it that the counselor operates on the principle that the individual is basically responsible for himself and willing for the individual to keep that responsibility. The counselor operates on the principle that the client has the drive to become mature and socially adjusted, independent, productive, and relies on this force, not on his own powers, for therapeutic change. If the counselor creates a warm and permissive atmosphere in which the individual is free to bring out any attitudes and feelings which he may have, no matter how unconventional, absurd, or contradictory these attitudes may be, the client is free to withhold expression as he is to give expression to his feelings. If the limits which are set are simple limits on behavior and not limits on attitudes, this applies mostly to children. The child may not be permitted to break a window or leave the room, but he is free to feel like breaking the window or to feel like leaving the room. And thus the feeling is fully accepted. The adult client may not be permitted more than an hour for an interview, but there is full acceptance of his desire to claim more time. And you can always blame Medicare or Medicaid or the insurance company, say that you're only paid for an hour. And if these and other conditions are met, Rogers believed in a great majority of cases that the following results would take place. The client would express deep and motivating attitudes, would explore his own attitudes and reactions more fully than previously have done, and stop denying feelings that they had, arrive at a clearer conscious realization of the attitudes, and in the light of this clearer perception, will choose on their own initiative and on own responsibility and new goals which are more satisfying. Now, the cornerstone of this process is no judgment. And this seems so backwards. After all, didn't the patient come to the doctor for advice? Rogers changed all that. First, he called the patients clients, very intentionally, suggesting a more equal relationship. And it's a therapy that radically and almost dogmatically trusts the good in each human being. I think Walt Whitman poetically stated Rogers' therapeutic milieu when he said, "I will leave all and come and make hymns to you. None has understood you, but I understand you. None has done justice to you. You have not done justice to yourself. I am only he who places over you no master, owner, better, God, beyond what waits intrinsically in yourself." Creating the space for other human beings to be their best selves. It's a literal adherence to the words of Jesus who said, "Judge not." And it's the hardest thing about practicing a humanist psychology, because we live in a society that believes that bad behavior and thoughts should be punished. Friends will shun you, and family will shame you. Strangers will blame you. If the government doesn't get you, God will. We are told that the world is vindictive from the top down. And I'm thinking of vindictive even in the positive term of things will be vindicated. Vindictive. But what if that is not true? Carl Rogers felt if a person could be exempt from the vindictiveness, they could stop acting defensively and start living a fulfilling life. In 1782, Judith Sargent Murray wrote the Universalist Catechism. It's hard to believe that we actually had catechisms, but we did at one time. In Universalism, the God was not vindictive, and that was to transform all human relations. She asks the question, what is the rule of conduct for Christians? And the answer is, they will endeavor that benevolence should guide their every action. Virtue will be the principle of their lives between man and man. They will deal with equity. They will not judge. They will not set at naught their brother, but they will do unto others as they should do unto them. And they will be solicitous at all times, and set a guard upon the door of their lips, which is a very Rogerian thing. You shut up and don't give advice, even though the person really, really needs it. And then she continues, who will they consider as their brother? They cannot avoid considering all mankind as brethren, for the same breath of God animates them, and they are descended from the same stock and redeemed by the same Emmanuel. Humanistic psychology and Unitarian Universalists share these same ideals. But we also share the same problems. This non-judgmental stance can be perceived as indecisiveness in the face of evil. That any of you who are on the web, and I urge you to just write in Carl Rogers, Paul Tillich, and look for the video. A half hour of this psychologist talking to this theologian. And Tillich said he liked the positive regard thing, but he said that there are demonic forces greater than the goodwill of individual human beings. And that is a struggle that we as Unitarian Universalists must always look to, is while we're looking for our own personal spiritual path, how does that interact with things that really do seem to be evil? How do you remain non-judgmental in the face of evil? Some may even doubt whether there is a concept of evil in Rogers, Maslow, or Unitarian Universalism. I believe there is, but it's often unstated. Abuse of power is considered evil. Blindly following orders is considered evil. Not being creative is considered evil. Spontaneity is better than being in a rut. Rogers notes that in his outline of therapy that behaviors can be limited and sometimes need to be. Violence really is not allowed. However, wanting to be violent is allowed. It's a feeling that's real and should not be ignored. Accepting a feeling doesn't necessarily mean that you approve of it. You might think that a person has no right to be angry with you, but that is the reality of the situation. If they are angry with you, they are angry with you. And you need to accept the reality of the situation. Do not demand that they stop being angry. I mean, this might shut them up, and I think all of us as children were grown up and we were mad at our parents, and they said, oh, don't be angry. It'll be better. And he just shuts you down. And it shuts a person down for a while. but then they are just merely resentful on top of being angry. They're just being quiet about how angry they are. But seeking to understand creates a space where the angry person themselves is able to understand. And the anger, instead of being something that has to be destroyed or put down or met with even greater anger, can be a window to a new learning. This philosophy is not amoral. It simply refuses to use abusive tactics to stop abuse. It lives the biblical phrase, "Do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good." Another critique of this approach is that it's self-centered. And that's true. It is self-centered, but it is not selfish. The selfish person is defensive and suspicious of the world. The self-actualized person is open to the world, free to respect others as they respect themselves. The paradox of the transcendentalists, Thoreau, Emerson, Fuller, and Whitman, is that they really promoted this narcissistic dreaming. But at the same time, they were also social reformers, peace activists, feminists, conservationists, and abolitionists. And Unitarian Universalism today, despite being a religion that allows people to find their personal spiritual path, we are very active and have always been active in the social concerns of the day. In fact, self-centeredness may be a prerequisite for social action. What good is it to love our neighbors as ourselves if we do not love ourselves? What good is it to love our neighbors as ourselves if we do not love ourselves? Another danger of humanist psychology and Unitarian Universalism is thinking that we already are self-actualized. It's tempting to read about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's usually illustrated in the books as a pyramid, and you climb up that pyramid and you stand at the mountaintop of self-actualization and plant your flag. But I know any of us who've actually climbed a mountain know that when you're on the shoulder of the mountain, you think you're closer to the top than you actually are. And I think a lot of us get stuck at the fourth level of Maslow's hierarchy, which is esteem. Self-esteem and esteem within one's community. We come to church and pour out self-esteem like coffee and share congratulations like donuts. But the moment we think we have arrived, the process stops. As soon as we bind ourselves to satisfaction, we cease to be free. The words of William Ellery Channing, a founder of Unitarianism in America, still provoke us this day. He said, "I call that mind free which resists the bondage of habit, which does not mechanically copy the past nor live on its old virtues, but which listens for new and higher monitions of conscience and rejoices to pour itself forth in fresh and higher exertions." So, no matter how self-actualized we might think we are, and how fully functioning we may indeed be, we can't stay. Our religion and humanist psychology calls us to ever strive. Let's pour forth our minds and our spirits and inspire each other into being better than we are and closer to what we could be. I open the floor to you. See, talkback is also a non-hierarchical form that allows more voices to be heard than the expert. Because you all are experts.
I think I took a tiny step up Maslow's mountain last week. I spent the week in Chicago, and I was going to mention this in Joys and Concerns, but it seems to fit here too. I am very thankful to y'all for my being able to go there, and of course I need to explain that because none of you knew, many of you didn't know I was there, and probably a few of you wouldn't know why. But one of the first things I did when I came to the fellowship was I got involved with Change, which is our local affiliate of the IAF. And I was selected to go to their national training last week. So I spent a week in Chicago, and there was a lot of Rogers and Maslow and what they had to say, and it was very inspirational. And I learned about how they do what they do in New York and Boston and Chicago and Los Angeles and on and on and on. So I had a great time. I hope to be able to share some of what I learned through the congregation. They had a lot of things to say about how to develop congregations to be more effective in social action, and yep, I'm thrilled.
When I was a graduate student, I did a major paper on Maslow, and only later, at the time I didn't recognize it, but only later I realized that Maslow was led me to the Unitarian Universalist and to liberal politics.
This is sort of difficult, but I share with you that my father was the oldest child in our family. He often told me that I am my mother's son. I share this with you only because I think there is a predetermination by genetics and otherwise that goes, and you should integrate this into whatever you were saying. I agree with everything, but I do think I'm predetermined.
The thing of how free are we? I mean, that the statement of freedom that undergirds our denomination and this humanist psychology is a faith statement. All ye who think that you have little faith, if you believe in human potentiality and freedom, that is a major faith thing, and we always have to wrestle with how free indeed are we?
Yeah, our absolute freedom is also conditioned and informed by our social environments, our families, our communities, and that's why people who are similar in many, many ways make different kinds of decisions and different kinds of value judgments based on the social structures from which they emerged and in which they live.
Well, I became a convert of Carl Rogers almost 45 years ago in undergraduate school, and it served as a precursor to my becoming a Unitarian. The philosophies dovetail exquisitely. I want to thank you, Charlie, for the series on psychologists and psychiatry and psychoanalysis. One of our members mentioned a few weeks ago when you were talking about Carl Jung that psychoanalysis is not for everyone. But I'm a firm believer that psychotherapy is for everyone, including individual, couple, marriage, family, and group psychotherapies. And I've practiced for almost 40 years now, a little over 40 years, and still find it exciting, challenging, and a way to grow myself individually.
My son is here, but being that he's not in the room, I'm going to embarrass him. Because we were talking about this freedom and saying that all feelings should be accepted. And he says, I'm not going to do that because I've been to parts of my thoughts that are the slum of my psyche, and I don't want to return. And I thought of the whole idea of the shadow and how these different concepts wrap into each other.
The part that bothers me is knowing and seeing individuals who have major chemical or psychological imbalances. I don't know how one will define that. And knowing that they're not free in some way, and and I think that traditional psychotherapy, sometimes chemical therapy, doesn't do anything in terms of remedying their process or their living.
Yeah, it's that whole biological determinism. What is freedom? And if one needs medication to feel free, which I've done in some of my times, I've taken antidepressants in my history, and it's like, well, I'm dependent on this pill in order to feel most like myself. The whole concepts of freedom are very difficult. Okay.
Is there much psychoanalysis done these days, or psychotherapy? I've heard that psychiatrists a lot of times now dispense chemical therapy rather than the original psychoanalysis.
Well, they're both done. I mean, I think that the chemical fix is usually a good thing to cut symptoms sometimes and allows people to then explore what their issues are. I think most doctors and people who are therapists kind of try to strike what's the best balance for each individual. There are doctors and therapists in here who might be able to answer that better than I.
Just to answer that, I think mostly it has evolved to where psychiatrists do more of the medication management, and psychotherapists, counselors, social workers who don't have MDs will typically do the psychotherapy, the talking therapy.
Since we're discussing psychiatry, you don't have to point out to Steve that psychoanalysis is for women. They're the ones that need it.
Oh, sorry. Though I affirm your right to have that opinion, I think we need to affirm the right of people to respond.
And talking about me. Are you? Because I admitted to being psychoanalyzed? Tough. Tough. It really helped. And I'm going to say again that for some of us, it is very good. For a lot of us, we don't need it. But we do work in depth if we're going to work with some patients. And medication is not always the way to heal. It helps. It does not heal. It is the humanistic touch. It is the healer inside both the patient, if you'll excuse my use of that word, and the one who serves the patient. If that wounded healer of the therapist can come out and connect with the wounded person that he or she is working with, then transformation will take place. You don't see it. You sense it, you feel it in time.
Let us sing with joy. We claim the growing light. Hymn number 345 in your order of service. Please rise.